Hello again. Hi.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Zach. So we called this session One Student's Perspective. I think it's fair to say that you're hardly representative of just one student. First of all, I met Zach in the green room before we got going today, and he was busily poring over papers, and I thought he was preparing for this morning. He sort of looked up at me and he said, "I'm so sorry, I was trying to get some physics homework done before we began this morning." But let me I think it would be helpful to give a little bit of your bio before we begin. First of all, you're a junior at Henry Clay High School in Lexington, Kentucky. And your fellow students elected you to serve on your school's decision-making council. And that's a body, I gather, that decides everything from who the next school principal is to school policy. There has never been a student serving on that council before. It's been teachers, administrators, parents, and it's been around for 25 years, and you made the case that there should be a student there. And then second, you're also a leader in the Student Voice team, and that's a group of students in Kentucky that go across the state advocating for local and state education policy changes.
Right. So the Prichard Committee Student Voice Team is a student-led initiative of the Prichard Committee, which has been around for a couple decades. But what the Prichard Committee is all about is citizen education advocacy, making sure that citizens are involved in the democracy of schools. And about 5 years ago, they realized we're missing something from the conversation. In many ways, what was missing in earlier parts of the morning, which is we talked a lot about the stakeholders in the room. We talked about parents, we talked about teachers, we talked about administration, we talked about policymakers. And what we failed in many ways to discuss the perspective of is that of students. So the Student Voice team really birthed from that notion 5 years ago that what we need is to have student voice and student perspective when having these discussions when it comes to education policy. In 1990, the Kentucky Education Reform Act was passed, and that's what established school-based decision-making councils, the body on which I serve. And the law was really clear. We want to get all stakeholders present. We want to get, the law requires that 3 teachers serve, 2 parents, and 1 administrator. And what the law failed to provide for is for student representation, and that's a movement that is growing across Kentucky, is to grow student representation on these bodies, the highest school governance bodies, because it's imperative that students' voices are respected and heard for 2 main reasons. And the first is that students have added value when it comes to education policy. Students are experts when it comes to the classroom. I spend 35 hours a week in the classroom. Add on homework, extracurriculars, that is a full-time job. Students understand the classroom really well. And until we start to internalize that, and until our policy and accountability models start to understand that, we're going to continue to have massive opportunity and achievement gaps. So that's the first thing, added value. The second thing that's really important to discuss when considering student voice is that it increases self-efficacy, agency, and interest in education. The classes I perform best in, and I'm sure all of us can agree, we all performed best in when we were students, is the ones we were interested in because we felt listened to, we felt heard to, respected, and so that's why the work is so important.
That's great. So we spent the morning hearing from a lot of adults, and in some ways what we asked you here to do is to give us some sense of the student perspective. And one of the things you do is you go around the state of Kentucky and you go into schools and you talk to your fellow sophomores, juniors, seniors, and ask them questions like, how do you feel about school? Do you feel heard? What's your experience? And I would love you to tell us some of the stories that you're hearing when you're actually in the schools.
So last summer we finished writing a policy report called Students as Partners. And the idea was, let's take this to the grassroots level. Let's go to schools. So far we've gone to over a dozen schools from Appalachian coal country to inner city Louisville, really getting a great cross-section, and we're continuing to do that. In fact, tomorrow I'll be speaking with 1,800 students, and then we'll be doing an interactive workshop with over 400 students, discussing these concepts of meaningful student voice and about action. So with regards to personal stories and anecdotes here, some of our members, for example, we have a member, Amanda Wallstedt. She's from Knox County, Kentucky. And she grew up in an extremely rural environment, and now she's at Wellesley College in New England, and it's an extremely different environment, I'm sure, as you all can understand, in a multitude of ways. But what's important, and what Amanda's really been one of the leaders of this movement, is about saying, my opinion matters, my voice matters. I am an expert on my education. I'm an expert on this transition, and my voice matters not just for me, but also for other students who can be living a similar experience. We support we recently launched a blog to share the voices of students. We had a African American girl recently share her story about what it is to be in a magnet program, which is dominated by white and Asian students. What is it like to be a gender nonconforming student? These are questions that matter, and they're really, they're not just about Kentucky. They're pertinent to the entire nation because they're emblematic of the issues that students face across the entire nation.
So when Randy Weingarten, the president of the AFT, was here talking to Michelle Norris, one of the things she said she heard from students is a profound lack of joy in the classroom. And are you hearing that?
Certainly. I will attest that our schools in many ways are designed like a prison. And not just in the school to prison pipeline, but my school literally has A block, B block, C block. The architecture of the school was designed similar to those for a race riot, so kids can exit quickly. And we have these blocks. And so when we have this prison mentality, of course kids don't want to be there. And it's so important. We need to discuss this on two main levels, and that is not just of the student experience, but that of the teacher experience as well. I think if there's one main misconception about student voice that I could fix, it's that student voice and teacher voice are not competing interests by any means. Both are on the front lines of the classroom. Both have unique and extremely important perspectives when it comes to our education policy. And so we need to be listening to all stakeholders present, and that, specifically means students.
One of the things you just described was the fact that you're going to inner city schools and you're also spending time in rural schools and in coal country. Are the issues the same, or do you think different things are happening in those worlds?
I think we have to view everything from a lens of intersectionality. I think students in rural schools, particularly in my generation, many of them recognize a shared struggle with African American students in inner city Louisville or in Lexington. There are these divides that all students experience and that we all face, and that the entire landscape needs to recognize. What this generation demands of us, and what this time demands of us, is an intersectional politics, and intersectional policies that recognize that we all have things to gain and lose. And that's why I think that certainly there are differences between rural and urban schools, and I'm not going to minimize them whatsoever. But I think students are acutely aware of how similar we are as well.
You went to visit a school in Eastern Kentucky, and something pretty stunning was happening in the lunchroom there. Can you?
So
what happened?
We actually didn't visit the school. This is a friend of mine who he's a member of student voice team. But yeah, so I'm sure as many of you know, there's a policy of replacing school lunches if you're unable to pay with cheese sandwiches or with other things. And the number one goal of the student voice team is to support students to amplify their voices. We have a threefold mission: amplify student voices, elevate student voices into the conversation regarding policy, and integrate student voices into school governance decisions. And what students were doing at that school was fighting for basic human dignity and respect. And again, that's emblematic of these larger issues that are playing out on the national level. Students' perspectives are so central when discussing our education policy because we need to recognize that we're currently have an incomplete picture. A lot of the panelists earlier in the morning talked about how we need to get everyone present, and we need to have a discussion with all people, and we need to give schools back to the parents. We need to give schools back to the students. That's how our central focus needs to be, and that's why the story with regards to school lunches is one of many that again plays to this larger issue.
You spend a lot of time talking to other students about their stories, and you actually have a story of your own that unfolded at your school. Would you tell us what happened?
My name is Acharyas Sippy. I am the grandson of a Hindu Indian immigrant and a New Jersey Jew. I if you can't tell, I'm not originally from Kentucky. I was born in New York, raised in California and Minneapolis, and I moved to Kentucky about 2 years ago now. So, being a Jewish American in Kentucky has opened my eyes to a lot of things, and I have to say, one, I'm extremely grateful, and I love the place. It has certainly burst my bubble. that much I will give it. And there's so many things that I've learned. I've befriended one of my best friends is the daughter of someone who works in the coal industry, and it's amazing, and it's so eye-opening. But yes, there were also incidents at my schools of swastikas being drawn, of KKK being vandalized on the school. And I think this is actually great, because what it gets to is the difference between adult and students' perspectives here. So when I went public about the information about some of the hate that I received, and I posted on Facebook, and reporters at the Lexington Herald Leader and at some of the local news affiliates contacted me, and I had a conversation with them. And the response from the superintendent and my principal, both of who I respect immensely and who are doing a relatively good job, both of their responses were, give us names. Zach, tell us the perpetrators, and we will, make sure they face consequences. And I said, no, hell no. That's not going to solve the issue. And students understand this, right? It's not about, and a lot of those people, it's rooted in ignorance, not in malice whatsoever. They don't understand how powerful and how hateful those images are. And so it's so important that we look at the student perspective here. And that is, there's ignorance, there's bystander culture. I'm not the one that's going to stand up. I'm not going to stop, when I hear the N-word or the term fag being used. I'm not going to stand up and say stop. I'm not going to stop when I, hear Holocaust jokes. So someone has to be that person. And what that requires is tolerance education, not punishing the perpetrators. And so again, we need to be looking at students' perspectives here when making these decisions that are so impactful and so important.
Thank you. I think we probably have time for one question from the audience. Does anybody have a question? I think right over here.
I can speak loudly if that's okay. Okay, so I'm interested, from an adult perspective, people talk a lot about preparing students to be global ready, ready for this interconnected world that you're living in. I'm interested in whether that's something the students talk about.
Thank you. I was actually thinking about this morning. I woke up early after having Passover Seder last night, and I took a flight from DC to DC from Lexington, and I was flipping through the Washington Post app this morning, and the little subtitle was there, "Democracy dies in darkness." And I have a response to that. Democracy dies in apathy, not in darkness. And so I think what young people understand is, and what young people, sadly, many of them are, is apathetic and indifferent, because of what we're dealing with is learned helplessness, societal learned helplessness. What we have is this broken cycle. Students aren't willing to share perspectives because they don't know how. Adults don't seek out perspectives. Then the quality of information, of data, of student voice deteriorates constantly, because students don't know how or what to say, and they fear that it won't be taken seriously, and adults don't seek it out. And so we have this endless cycle, and the same thing happens electorally and globally, right? Why do we have, in Kentucky in 2015, the gubernatorial election had a 30.6% turnout rate. In the United States, for the presidential election, with all the hype it got, less than 60% of people showed up to vote. Why is that? Because people have internalized the notion that my voice doesn't matter, my vote won't count, and none of it will make a difference. And so what adults need to be doing, if anything, is to combat that, is to empower students. At the end of the day, it's not just about, the nice term of global citizenry. Because at the end of the day, education has to be more than just college and career readiness. It has to be about community too. And that's one of the themes that we got, earlier this morning. And so it has to be about empowering students' voices to share, and we all benefit immensely when that happens.
Zach Sippy, thank you so much.